then we are recording the webinar, and it will be on our YouTube webinar channel, and we will send a link to you anyway for that, so you can review, at least review the webinar itself. So hopefully you can all hear me, and we shall move swiftly on. I'm Chris Davis. As I said, I set up Engage about 5 years ago now. I've been in and around the industry since God was a boy, since 1990. Worked in insurance in the UK, then in wealth management for the best part of 20 years. And worked in Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia for the best part of 12 years. So overall, had a good experience internationally in the UK, and certainly was introduced to financial technology in 2003-04 when I was in Australia, which I suppose inspired me to go on and build Model Office, our RegTech solution. So today, really, we're going to be talking about what exactly is RegTech and MiFID II in particular, why and how you are affected, because I'm assuming that you are affected in some shape or form, or else you wouldn't be on this webinar this morning, where we can look at RegTech, digital compliance solutions and business development solutions, how they can help financial advisors, planners, wealth management sectors overall, and then we'll look at some final tips for employing RegTech on the business as we go forward. This slide really gives an idea of, we had a webinar a couple of weeks ago now. As mentioned, this is our 10th webinar, which really focused on what is RegTech and the rise of RegTech, which has come underneath the FinTech evolution, if you like. We sit, you can see Model Offices there, we sit very much in the interpretation of the regulation. So Model Office, for example, factors in all the regulatory directives from the FCA, from MiFID, as we'll talk about today, and also information around the FCA papers that they kick out on an increasing scale, it seems. And we take a lot of the good outcomes from all those papers, put it into the system, and then that gives the outputs and benchmarks your firm. Okay. What is MiFID? Let's talk a bit about what MiFID actually is. Well, you know, the markets in financial instruments regulation is, as it says, it's a regulation in itself, and is therefore directly applicable really to each member state in the EU. Now, obviously, we have Brexit in this country to factor in. We're still kind of like 18 months away potentially from leaving the EU, so it definitely applies to us. The FCA haven't quite gold-plated into the UK, but it's very much a big part of what we're doing, or what the FCA are doing going forward. The important thing regarding MiFID itself as a directive is effectively its implementation at a national level, and this means that each member state will have to implement it in a certain degree. And the FCA, you may have seen in July, issued their second consultancy paper on MiFID II, where, as I mentioned, it's actually almost gold-plated into the UK. There are some exceptions, as we'll see. But what is MiFID II? What's it all about? And you know, to understand that, to get a grip of that, we just need to really go back to, you know, treating customers fairly, those 6 principles, because you know, it's my belief that MiFID II, and certainly MiFID then MiFID II, which is honing in on the key customer protection elements, regulation, MiFID II is really treating customers fairly on speed. That's the best way I can describe it. That's what it's all about. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the 6 outcomes of treating customers fairly, and you've applied it to your businesses. And with regards to that, really, if you look at this, revisit it and start to look at it, if you're confused about anything that's coming out from MiFID, this will help you put it into context. The other element as well is knowing your customer, and really it's about the journey that your customer or client is on with you as a business, mapping out your company's, which is what MiFID II is really focusing on. It's really, the journey that the engagement process that you've got with your clients is under high scrutiny with MiFID II. And it's about ensuring that your client and the regulator need to understand your position. So for example, what we're talking about there is marrying your offline and online experience, allowing clients to join in your services at certain levels. Are you catering for clients who are demanding more DIY services like auto investment, for example? Looking at social media data that you might be amalgamating within the business and mining that to get the most out of that, but also making sure that you're fitting requirements on that. Really, what we're talking about here is, as Chris Hewitt was speaking at a recent conference we visited from the FCA. I mean, it's detailing the discussion around the making sure that you're getting all that really fine granular detail around these issues, and not just having a tick box or checklist mentality really, to gathering that data and proving that you know your customer. Who is affected? Well, really, it's pretty much the universe of anybody who's involved in offering investment propositions and advice in the marketplace. So investment firms, market operators, including trading venues and data reporting service providers. It's important to mention that MiFID II is coming through. It's a heavy piece of kit that's coming through in January next year. Obviously, with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regime, and the Senior Management Certification Regime, which was last week's 2 weeks ago, we ran a webinar on the SMCR. It's like a jigsaw. It all fits together, and it's important that you as a business know how it starts to fit together, and that's why RegTech can help. It can help you understand, get a grip really of how it all interlinks into your daily tasks and activities in the business. It's also important to mention that there are the Article 3 exempted firms, which is really the firms who do not hold client funds or securities. It does not provide any investment service other than receipt and transmission of orders or investment advice. So these Article 3 exempt firms, financial advisors are a good example, who don't hold cash and are not involved in the cash regime, and are pretty much in that zone. And what we're looking at here is that there is what we call a new, at least analogous test, which effectively means that domestic requirements for MiFID II are still applied to Article 3 firms. It was interesting when they came out with their final paper on MiFID II. That's really the industry review of MiFID II applications, where effectively the FCA was saying that they wanted more flexibility around this, and they weren't making it mandatory, for example, for financial advisories and wealth managers, etc., to record client communications, although it is applicable to discretionary investment management firms. So even though you may be an Article 3 exempt firm, at the end of the day, there are key areas of MiFID II that you will need to be applying to your business, as we'll see as we move on. The other thing to mention as well is that you need to be thinking of this as a cultural change. And I don't know if you remember the FCA risk outlook in 2014, but that focused on inherent environmental structures and business conduct risks to the business, and it really focused on the conflict of interests, cultures, incentives, the market structures, all the way through to the technological environment, policy regulatory environment, and then obviously the inherent biases and behavioral economics piece that came into that. And this is very much a big part of MiFID. MiFID is a cultural change. Again, a couple of weeks ago on the SMCR webinar, think of it as a cultural change that will move your mindset out of a checklist tick box environment, and you will then be able to grapple with what strategies that you need and tasks that you need to do to put this into place. So whenever I talk about MiFID to audiences, as I was up in Edinburgh this week, speaking to a lot of advisors up there on this particular issue, the problem that we've got is that, you know, everyone looks like a bit like monks scream, and it's just like, you know, the scales go in the eyes, and it's a bit shock horror. Well, you know, what we're trying to do really is simplify what's coming through with MiFID II, and that's what Model Office, our compliance and business development technology platform, will do. It will RAG rate it. It will take a look at what's the important issues that you need to look at now, get right, get into place before January 2018 and then beyond, and how that changes. Because the most important thing is, unfortunately, it doesn't stand still. You're going to get a lot of, you know, it's raining regulations at the moment, as you all know, and we've not only got also issues which are coming down the line, like Brexit, etc. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, and the most important digital platform could do, like Model Office, is give you that certainty to know and what the algorithm, as I said, will do, is give you the steers and strategies, some strategy and what we'll look is the stuff in the red on this particular compliance. So MiFID II is all about aggregation of costs and service charges to your clients. Looking at advice, so sufficient range, personal recommendations. So the advice definition has changed with the Her Majesty's Treasury's paper that came out earlier this year, which was looking at the MiFID definition, not the retail activities order definition. So that's an important thing we'll look at. Suitability, you know, what is the issue in place at the moment? Financial advisors and planners, or managers, or that any advice that they're giving their clients is suitable, which is obviously about understanding policy procedures, understanding the nature of products and costs and risks, and making sure it fits the client needs. And then you've also got the product manufacturers on the other side under MiFID II, which have to then ensure that the product governance, the structures, and anything around complex products, which we'll talk about, are appropriate for the end consumer needs from that point of view. So that's a double lock scenario, and because advisors and wealth managers are at the cutting edge of the industry in more ways than one, they need to really be very mindful, particularly if they're selling structured products, for example, or have a structured product solution in their centralized investment proposition. Then from that perspective, you need to be very aware of appropriateness and act accordingly. Client communication recording, I'll talk about. Really, that's ensuring that all communications are really recorded in a comparable way across the business. We have come across a lot of advisory firms in the market here where we have, you know, someone who's doing it in a certain way, whether it's written recording or whatever, and then the majority of the firm is now digitized and using online practice management systems, and that is a big question mark from a MiFID perspective. You know, ideally everybody needs to be on board using recording equipment in a uniform way across the business and capturing the right data going forward. And then we've got reporting, which I'll also talk about. So we've got to make sure that you know, the data is congruent, the quality is high. GDPR obviously is coming through in May next year. That's important. There is a 10% drop rule where you have to report if the funds in a quarter go down by over 10%. So again, we'll talk about that and how that works. When we're talking about recording and data, reporting and data requirement disclosure, that's anything from the advice that you're giving and the costs of that advice, the investments that the proposition that you've got, any trading, wealth management fees, the platform, the tax wrapper that you're using, any specialist services that you've got into play. So from that perspective, hopefully this slide will give you more of a context for what we're talking about. Really, this is work that we produced for a financial advisory not quite a year ago, and it was really terms and conditions in terms of business with clients. And what we wanted to do was focus on how they segmented their clients into three particular segments, how that worked, what the for the service, so they could see the services that they were available to them. And then most importantly, you can see in the red circle there is we were giving examples on based on an investment and then looking at the aggregated costs across that investment, an example of how that would cost and how that would look in pounds and pence. So that is really the regulator is looking for, and the FCA will be looking for going forward, because at the end of the day, in their business plan, they've written that relatively few advisors are transparent about the pricing before they sell advice. As part of the 17-18 FCA business plan, and the other thing to mention as well is that there is an issue disclosure if you looked at the suitability paper that came out in, I'm sure you're all familiar with, because they're really on the fact that I think it was about 41% of firms were found wanting of disclosing costs and fees of services to meet their client needs. So that is a big area with MiFID II, and you know, if you haven't done this type of exercise around segmentation and around showcasing what, you know, examples of what they get for their money and also how much it's going to cost them, we definitely recommend you kind of look at that. Communication recording and this, you know, at least analogous ruling uniformity across the business. Now, look, because financial advisors, you know, and planners, they can actually do it. You know, you don't have to have a recording system in place. You know, the professional practice element to actually having a recording system in place speak volumes. And so we, at all times, when we're doing audits with financial advisors, planners, wealth managers, you know, it's one of the things that we do talk about and say, well, why don't you look at that can help with the business? I appreciate, you know, it's not the case for the smaller firms. That might be not, you know, be too costly, but it does form a great basis for making sure you're capturing all the client data. But also for those firms who are using client portals with technology, again, that's a solution that you can look at refining over time to make sure you're capturing all the relevant data, as Chris Hewitt was talking about regarding know your clients, know your customer. So this is really looking at, you know, what client communication can do done well. It offers, you know, if you get it right, it's all about offering a centralized data storage for communications across the business, centrally managed retention policies. All communications are easily searchable. Looking at making sure they're readily available if you get a compliance visit, for example, or for your compliance reviews, providing quick, cost-effective dispute resolution and trade reconstruction. Avoid swivel chair compliance. So really what we're talking about there is that a lot of firms may use multiple or disparate solutions to meet compliance obligations. Streamlining it down, whether it's a system you're using on a written communication basis or a digital telephone recording system, or using a digital platform, that's kind of important to from that perspective as well. The 10% drop rule, really, that's all about effectively, you know, your frequency of reporting. That's changing for, you know, it's quarterly rather than half yearly, and there is this compulsion to inform clients if their portfolio drops by 10% or multiple there each quarter. Now, look, who reports? Is it the discretionary fund management group, or is it the advisor? And there's a whole grey area around this that needs to be firmed up. But the issue really comes down to how have you developed your client relationship, and is this actually an opportunity to be using this particular issue to get closer client relationships? So in other words, what we're saying really, from that perspective, is that certainly with appropriateness testing, as we've talked about, and appropriateness of the product manufacturing, from that perspective, the onus could actually, the responsibility could actually fall on the discretionary fund management group from that perspective, but the advisor needs to know how to manage structured products in their proposition. Then they would all be involved in that process. But at the end of the day, if obviously portfolios are going down, and this is a moment in time with the context of how it's done. You can give your client a good view of the market, the growth trends, and the growth opportunities as it goes forward. using technology as well, obviously with cash flow modeling and ATR tools as you go forward. So we do think the 10% drop rule could be used as an opportunity going forward. This is where I was trying to make MiFID II quite interesting to my children last night, and we kind of like had a chat about this, which was interesting. They still got a bit lost when I started talking about UCITS funds, but there you go. But really what we're talking about is complex and non-complex products and what constitutes a complex and non-complex product. Now, the FCA is kind of really sat on the fence here. They're not coming down one way or the other. But at the end of the day, as practitioners in the market, we need to know our proposition. We need to know what's in there. The research and due diligence has to be right. So from that perspective, really what we're talking about is most non-UCITS retail schemes, or NURS, as NURS as they're called, exchange trade funds and also investment trusts, are generally viewed as non-complex. But again, it's a scenario. It depends on how it's structured and how it's put it into play. Complex are generally convertible loan stock, subscription shares, derivatives, and the risks associated with that, maybe some property or infrastructure funds, which has liquidity issues, for example. But really the focus on is what additional market information, management information do you need? What is your client needs? What client type do you have? The distribution channel. You need to check appropriateness and really spot the differences between the features and benefits of the funds that play and calibrate that against rules. And that's exactly what Model Office does in this particular area from that point of view. I mean, Article 57 of MiFID II is all about, does the client really understand what they're buying? And we would also spin that around and say, well, do you actually understand what you're selling? Being quite crude about this. So that's kind of scenario. Advice definition is something else that has been looked at here. In the definition of independence being, the whole of market, has really moved through now to offering a sufficiently diverse market analysis, which I think is far more helpful. Whole of market, what is whole of market? The whole big universe of investments and solutions out there. How does that work? Well, really, the MiFID definition of advice based on a personal recommendation helps here. When a product date gets in the way, if you like, and that then helps with suitability, because what we're saying there is that financial advisories and wealth managers, that they can actually have more of a freedom, if you like, to offer guidance. So, for example, you can offer guidance around, ISA top-ups without going into the scenario of products, and that's not a personal recommendations. I mean, the retail activities order, which is what advice was based on, was far more wider definition of an investment, wider investment recommendation. That has actually been retained for the bad boys or bad girls in the market, where they're offering a wider interpretation of advice for those solutions, which effectively means that they have more of a proof on suitability than firms who are of advice, which is around the personal recommendation. But the issue is what is advice? Well, as the poet James Whitcomb Riley wrote, when I see a bird that walks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, I call that bird a duck. So, if it looks like advice, at the end of the day, advice, and then you need to focus on offering a personal recommendation, then its suitability will come into play there. So that's kind of important to know. When we go to assessing suitability itself, we ran a introduction to RegTech a few weeks ago, and my colleague Adam Owen went through these particular scenarios, and he kindly put it together for us. And I think it's very important to take a look at when we look at assessing suitability. The key questions to ask yourself, how do you explain risk in a way that the client will understand it? If you're using a risk discussion and agreed where they sit on that scale, when making recommendations, have you researched the choices for investments and the provider market sufficiently and confirm this to the customer? Have you explained to the customer external factors, changing interest rates, property markets, equities, global economy? So more of a stochastic rather than a deterministic approach. Have you explained the risks attached to the product or action recommended in a way that the customer is likely to understand? Getting client-informed consent is kind of crucial as well in all this. When we're looking at the capacity for loss, Rory Percival's produced a really good paper, which really brings, FG 11.5, I think it was, which was produced over 6 years ago now by the FSA, as it was, around the risk APR tools that are in the marketplace. And there's a lot of good stuff in there. But what we're looking at really is the impact of volatility on the portfolio, the terminal loss capital, sustained drop in investment. So really what you need to be doing is assessing all this and making sense of it. It understands it. It calibrates with the funds that you're using, the proposition that you use, and it all works accordingly in that way. And you're making it clear and you're recording it in a clear way, which is really what MiFID II is all about. And true capacity for loss are separate from attitude to risk. I don't know how many times you as a go back to your clients and do the ATR with your clients, and certainly once every 2 years, I think, is the rule of thumb. We would argue do it once a year. It's a great opportunity to go back to your client and discuss these things, and it will bring up maybe a whole load of more issues that they need to be talking about and looking at. Really what we're talking about, certainly with RegTech and Model Office and digital compliance and business development, is really benchmarking your practice. We do research in the market quarterly into the platform, and these are the key areas where we're looking at the MiFID II stuff. So MiFID II, bottom left, disclosure, comms, recording, suitability, appropriateness, independent advice is all in there. You've got specialist services, whether you're involved in pension transfers, are you utilising the FCA view on having an appropriate pension transfer analysis and what that entails. Are you using structured products? How does that work? Are you focused on long-term care, equity release? Again, that's all benchmarked into our RegTech platform. Senior management and certification regime, which is all about roles and responsibilities. Know your client, GDPR. Always bench yourself against what the regulators need and want, but also what your peers are doing as well. The RegTech solutions in itself works on 5 keys to building a professional practice to make sure that you're client-centric and sustainable. And as you can see here, the keys are a deep dive into the whole workings of a professional financial service firm and how it works, and it all interlinks. So what we're looking at really is building a balanced scorecard, if you like, across the business. Anything from your focus, which is all about the strategic planning, the corporate governance, the systems and controls, all the compliance areas, key financial ratios. The engagement is all about how you're engaging your clients and your stakeholders, such as your promise, centralized proposition and service, the technology that goes with that, and your system is back office management systems, CRM systems, data flows. And then your people is really all about the senior management regime, certification regime, and how that all interlinks. And it's important to mention as well, we gave a presentation to the Chartered Institute of Securities Investments last week about investment propositions. And really what RegTech will do is allow you to calibrate where you sit around all these key areas. A lot of it is covered with what we've talked about regarding MiFID II, but very important to put that into context around everything from the client profile to your ambition as a business and where you're going. So just a screenshot to finish off for you, a couple of screenshots here. You can see if you go through and use our platform, the keys are across the top, and this is key 1, looking at strategic planning. Each key has 9 to 11 business functions. So in this particular case, it's strategic planning. And you can see underneath the strategic planning, if you see my cursor here, you've got the question. This is a MiFID II related question. And then if you're struggling on the question itself, because it is a complex area, then we have pop-up resources down here that you can click on, and it will give you the full remit of what the regulator are asking you to do. And then you can answer the question and move on. Another one in your engagement is another MiFID II related question, which is all about, the recording or written note of client calls, meetings is uniform across the business, as we talked about. And again, you've got a pop-up resource into into Esma's Q&A on that, which gives you more context for you. And then you answer the question and you move on accordingly. And this is one in your promise, which looks at the cumulative costs. So this is the aggregation of costs, if you like, across your service and how that's worked. You can answer the question then as you go forward. What then happens is, as you finish the key, you get a score. We're hopefully making it, more engaging, and we're bringing gamification, if you like, and using a Fitbit mentality to this. So you've got your benchmark score here, which we independently verify. You then color code it on what you've scored, and then you click on the Learn How to Grow Your Score, where the algorithm, and it will give you steers, strategies, guidance about how to improve your score going forward. And then you'll finally get a full strategic plan, which can be up to a 50-page strategic plan, depending on your needs, all bespoken to how you've answered the questions in there. You've also got a radar chart, which gives you an idea of how you're scoring. And then you've got color coding summary below, a light version of your strategic report, and you get CIP Key. We've had it accredited and endorsed through the CISI and also CPD certification service. So top tips for you for applying, just to finish off for you, at key strategy, what strategy, blending the issues, really cost-benefit analysis of utilizing a RegTech platform, because it's the time, the cost savings, the de-risking of the business. I mean, the FAMR baseline report that came out from the regulator in July this year looked at the average compliance cost of 11% of income, 3% direct, 8% indirect, and we got over 50 firms now using Model Office. We found a direct relation between using Model Office and streamlining the business and a potential of saving costs. We're also in talks with two leading PI insurers in the market about using Model Office for their firms, and the effect potentially of reducing the costs of public indemnity insurance, which I'm sure you'd all welcome. It also offers really good governance. It gives you a four eyes approach. You're retesting, self-auditing, sense checking the business as you go forward from that perspective. And really, it's about doing that research and due diligence piece. We'd also recommend you do due diligence and research on the RegTech solution that you're using, as well as any robo solutions, any ATR solutions that you're using. Technology is not a panacea; it's not a silver bullet as you go forward. So really, that's it. It gives you a good idea, hopefully, of MiFID II, of the key issues that you're facing as a business as you go forward. The most important thing is to get engaged with it, not to be a rabbit in the headlights. There's lots of resources out in the marketplace, lots of good consultancies, lots of good technology, hopefully like Model Office, that can help you make sense of all this. And finally, if you're interested in Model Office, there's the URL with our. Please get in touch, give us some feedback. I will send you a copy of this webinar once it's live on our YouTube webinar channel. Most importantly, we want you to have a really chilled out, relaxed weekend. So thanks for you, and have a great Friday and a wonderful weekend.